Hey everyone, today's video is going to be covering a slightly different topic. We are going to go over portfolios, and in particular student portfolios that are designed to land you a job after you graduate. So my background is actually in design. I graduated as an industrial designer from Virginia Tech or Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. And this was in 2015, and over the course of my degree, I spent a lot of time developing and redeveloping a student portfolio. I was trying to do a lot to get my portfolio to match the things that I was hoping to achieve as a student, as a prospective intern, and eventually as a new graduate. And that person that I wanted to be, that designer, that professional, changed over time, and so did my portfolio. I made a lot of mistakes at the time that in hindsight I could have easily prevented by thinking through a couple of things, and I'm hoping to pass on those lessons to folks who are working on their portfolios. Whether you're a design student who's about to graduate and try to get an internship or their first job, or somebody who is maybe a recent graduate and trying to showcase their work in a portfolio format. And what's interesting about the intersection of design portfolios and product management is a lot of folks in product management come from design backgrounds, and even if they don't, the skills that they need to showcase as product managers fits very well into a portfolio format. So a portfolio is going to suit you well regardless of where you are on that spectrum, because a portfolio is ultimately showing a prospective school that you're applying to, a prospective employer, who you are as a designer or a professional, how you think, and how you approach problem solving, regardless of output. Now, it definitely helps if the output looks good, but anyone can go in and create like a cool rendering to showcase what they can do in a piece of software like KeyShot. It really helps to show how you got somewhere, because when someone's hiring you, they're not just hiring you for your skills on software or your skills as a sketcher. They're hiring you for your ability to put together a framework in which you do your work to achieve a certain goal that's outlined for you. So I think in that sense, a portfolio is great for a lot of people. If this is your first time to my channel, then welcome. My name is Kristina, and I am a product manager who is interested in all things product, design, technology, business, user experience, all of that. And I love talking about those things. I have started this channel to share some of my experiences and get some of yours, and talk about what it's like to work in product-related industries. I hope that you'll track the videos as I post them over time, and join my little community that I'm building here on YouTube. Now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and dig into the specific items that I want to go over. So to start off with, it is really important to develop a grid system for your portfolio. And what that means is a layout template that you can use over and over again for your projects, regardless of what that project is. That includes things like the overall layout, the gutters, and the margins as well. I like using a standard full bleed for my layout and having that be consistent, and then using that as the cover page, which I can show you in an example that I have for my own projects. And then for the body of the portfolio piece, having a grid where images and text can go, and that can shift around somewhat, but the cover is full bleed. I also like using a different accent color for each project that vibes with the brand that I set up for that project, while keeping other design elements like the layout, the pagination, the font pretty neutral so that it looks cohesive. So everything kind of looks the same except for the font color for accent text, and that is a different color, and that stands out. This helps create a sense of cohesion for the overall portfolio while working with the brand identity that's set up for different projects. Because unless you have a personal style that you're using across all of your projects, which is unlikely if you're learning to be a designer, you're trying to maybe explore different styles a little bit, unless you're very consistent in that style, it's going to look disjointed. So it's better to have everything be consistent, except for maybe something that ties into the brand. So maybe that's a logo that you have, or maybe it's something else. I like using color. One thing that the grid and this design system is really important for is for creating scalability as you work on more projects. So for instance, if you have a couple of projects in your freshman year or sophomore year that you're using to try to land an internship, you don't want to have to rework those projects completely year after year as you're building out your portfolio. And then after you graduate, you want to be able to use your student portfolio and add maybe some postgraduate pieces if you're trying to look for another job, switch out from the first company you landed on. If you maintain this grid, then that creates a sense of cohesion. And as your career changes, maybe you're moving away from industry and into another, all of your pieces can work with each other and you can swap them out. So for example, it becomes much easier to create a portfolio targeted towards UX opportunities. And then you can take out a couple of those UX projects, maybe keep one that's UX for a car and throw in another car project for another application for a car company. So it looks like you have a custom portfolio for each job you apply to, but really you're just switching out projects and they all have the same layout, so it looks really cohesive. Next up is the structure of your portfolio. It is really important if you are using your portfolio to try to achieve a specific goal, like landing a job or an internship, to structure your portfolio around that goal. You don't want your portfolio to read like a diary of, here are different things that I'm passionate about that I did a couple of years ago. Here's me dabbling in pottery. Here's me dabbling in illustration. Oh, by the way, I'm applying to be a UX designer. That lack of cohesion isn't going to get you anywhere in your portfolio. If your goal is to use your portfolio to get a job at, for instance, a furniture designer, then you want to structure everything around almost like an essay is how I would describe it. So you start off with your thesis. And if you're applying to a furniture designer, then your thesis is going to say, hey, here's who I am, here's why I would be great for this particular role as a furniture designer. And then the rest of your portfolio are going to be paragraphs supporting the statement you made in your thesis, which is your opening argument. So each project is like a paragraph that's making a different point, and then at the end it's all going to come together in a conclusion that's in an essay you would write out, but in your portfolio is implied for why the argument that you're making holds water. One thing that I also like to suggest is to have some kind of table of contents, whether your portfolio is digital or physical, that shows a potential reviewer what the projects are. Because I found that reviewers tend to gravitate towards certain projects right away. Maybe it's something about the little preview image you have of your final design. Maybe it's the name of the project. Maybe if the name of your project is describing what it is. Like, for example, here is a filtration system for growing hydroponic plants for apartment environment. Something about that title is potentially going to draw a reviewer, and they're going to just pick the thing that they want. So instead of making reviewers sit through the projects that you think are good, the reviewer is going to have typically limited time. And by offering them that table of contents, you're giving them the chance to pick what they want. And chances are it's going to be very similar, to go back to my literature analogy, it's going to be similar to what you experience when you walk into a library or a bookstore and you look at the books to pick something out. You're going to be less likely to like a book if it's handed to you and it's the first one on the shelf, and you're going to be more likely to like the book if there's something about it that drew you to it, something about the cover or the title, and you reached out and picked it up yourself. So doing that, letting the reviewer pick what projects they're looking at, gives you a great chance to prime them to be receptive to your projects, because they're more likely to be excited about the thing you worked on, and you want them to be excited and to like the thing that you worked on so that you can land the opportunity you're aiming for. Okay, this next one is going to be a little personal to me and might not apply to everyone, but when I graduated from Virginia Tech, the School of Design was founded in a school of architecture. You know, it's a Bauhaus school of design. It has very architectural minded principles. And as a result, a lot of architecture thinking went into the other programs, not just architecture. That included print design, industrial design, interior, landscape. And what happened was I was developing my portfolio from the perspective of an architect, because that was the bias with which that was being taught to me. So I was designing my portfolio for a print layout to be this like beautiful published book with these really refined colors and small print on a page. And in hindsight, that was a huge mistake because nobody ever looked at my print portfolio. Every time I submitted my print portfolio to an actual opportunity that would get me a job or an internship or something to that effect that wasn't a review, it was in digital format. So this tip is to not design your portfolio in print, only a digital format, unless you absolutely know that print is going to be the main way that your portfolio is viewed. The digital format is going to be optimally set up to let people view your work in the best way possible without you having to redo the work of setting everything up over and over again. Because what otherwise happens is you design everything for print and then you realize that you have to send a link to a website because that's the only way that the people that you're applying to will take a portfolio, for example. They want a link to your website and you realize, oh man, I have to take all this work I did for print, which includes different color palettes, different sense of scale. It's tons of factors that affect that, right? And you have to redesign all of that to work in a digital format. So just save yourself the heartache, go digital right away. One thing to keep in mind is not to design for full spreads, because when you're designing a book, you have to take into account how material is shown on the left page and the right page. When you're designing for a website, each page has to stand on its own, because for a lot of platforms, like for example Behance, your content's actually going to be shown vertically. So you can't show a page if you need another page for it all to make sense. It has to stand alone each page, which isn't a problem. You just have to take that into account when you're designing things. Luckily, right now, it's become easier than ever to take your materials and put them online. You can even make a website really easily. I'm sure you've seen a million ads for places like Wix or Squarespace, but those types of platforms do allow you a high degree of control to customize the sites in order to make it look exactly how you want. One other thing that's really important to do is, regardless of which platform you choose, to make sure that everything scales appropriately and is readable on all types of devices. So if you're using something like Wix or Squarespace, there are tools that let you preview all the content in an iPad format or tablet format, and on a phone as well. And your browser, if you're using something like Chrome, also allows you to go into the developer tools in order to see what something might look like on a mobile device. So just go in there, take a second to make sure it looks good on a phone, because you don't want someone opening your portfolio and find that it's like zoomed in on one corner of one page and they have to scroll to see the rest of the page. You want it to scale nicely. So be sure to test that. And that is especially important for anyone who's going into an area of digital design. Okay, now we're going to get into some more specifics. This is something I only noticed when I myself was starting to review a lot of portfolios, and that is, it's really important to keep text close to the image. So when you have descriptive text in a portfolio, and I can put up some examples, but essentially you're using text to annotate something visual. Most of your portfolio is going to be visual and telling a story through graphics, but text is important to provide context to information that's not readily available from the image itself. And it's going to, for example, call out things like your thought process, the material you used, why you picked one iteration of a design over another. And that text can be really hard to understand unless it's right next to an image. So when you do a layout, don't have the image spaced out in a way that the images are in one place and the text is in another, and the two are totally divorced from each other. Put that text, just shove it right in the image, so that all you have to do is look at the picture and move your eyes 2 millimeters to see the text explaining what is happening in the image and why it matters. Otherwise, you can have some really beautiful layouts where the layout looks like a coffee book and there's a little beautiful paragraph of text at the bottom, and the rest of the spread is devoted to these beautiful illustrations of space or product or whatever it is that you're designing. But it's impossible for a reviewer to understand what's going on without sitting and studying that page for several minutes the way that you would a coffee book. and you don't want it to be a copybook. You want it to be an advertisement for why you would do a great job at an opportunity that's being afforded to you. Next up, your technical skills as a designer should be relatively obvious from the output of your portfolio. It should be shown through your sketches, your renderings, your layouts, your graphics, all of that. But one thing that the portfolio can do that you can affect in the design of your portfolio, because your projects are done and over, you can't change those, right, is focusing your portfolio on telling your story. You want to focus on your process and not the results, because the results might be mixed since you're a student who's learning and experimenting and maybe some things weren't successful. But in focusing on what your thought process was and what decisions you were taking at different steps of the project, that is going to communicate to the portfolio reviewer who you are as a designer and why they might want to hire you. Very likely, you're going to be applying to something that is not 100% reflected in your portfolio. And what I mean by that is maybe you're applying to a company that does interfaces for refrigerators or something like that, but you don't have any interfaces for refrigerators in your portfolio. You have maybe like an app, you have a chair, and you have a beautiful, set of posters designed to help navigating in a subway system. So what do you do when your dream job or a really good position that you want to go for is in an area that doesn't match with what you have in your portfolio? You show in your portfolio who you are as a thinker, and then you can showcase that in your portfolio as you're taking the reviewer through your work. So it doesn't matter if you've never designed an interface for a refrigerator before, you're going to be a great fit because of reasons A, B, and C. And those reasons are things like what thought process you used to decide what direction to go in a design, different risks you took, and why they paid off or didn't pay off, how you formulated your brief for your project in order to determine what the overall scope of the problem is and why you wanted to tackle that problem in the first place. Like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? So for example, you can show how for a project you didn't know how to use something and you did some research, figured it out, and here is your first pass at doing it. And the great thing is that a lot of people reviewing those portfolios understand that you're maybe not extremely experienced or you're trying something new you haven't tried before. So being able to talk about trying things and succeeding them or failing and everything you learn from that is a great skill and is really important to explaining who you are as a thinker and a designer and a creator. To go back to the earlier point I made about your projects being your projects and you can't do anything about them at this point, you actually can do some things to improve your projects. So for example, if you have only 3 projects that you feel good about, you can spend a weekend doing an intensive case study or a hackathon of sorts on one project that you think you can do well. One example I like to use for my portfolio is I spent a couple of hours designing a tape measure. And it was just a tidy little sit-down project where I sat down, did some research, did some sketches, made a very basic prototype, and had a tape measure. And it was a great addition to my portfolio because I just explained the beginning of the project that, hey, this was done in a couple of hours, it's a fun little exercise, here's what I could do in the scope of a couple of hours. And it stands very differently against my other projects, which include things like my thesis that took almost a whole semester of work to complete. One other thing that you can also do is go back and redo some of the work on your earlier projects that you're not as happy with. That doesn't necessarily mean going in and redesigning the whole thing because that might not fit into what you want to do or the time you have available. But for example, if you're not happy with a couple of sketches or renderings on a project that is earlier on in your design career, you can go in and redo those sketches. You can redo the rendering and plug it in. It's not cheating, it's your own work, it's part of who you are as a designer. You can go in, you can clean it up, and if a couple of those sketches are holding you back from wanting to show off that project because you just don't feel good about them and you've grown as a designer since then, go in and redo them. And you can even mention it in the interview, like, hey, this is how I wish I would have sketch them when I did it, but I've grown since then, and you know, I did a better job now. And my last piece of feedback is to get some feedback from somebody else. It is imperative to have a bird's eye view perspective from somebody who isn't as close to your portfolio as you are and who can give you some feedback. Ideally, it would be somebody in the industry you're trying to get into, because they're going to have a more tailored perspective to that area and it's going to be more useful. If the feedback is something arbitrary that just seems like a pet peeve of theirs, you can disregard it because you're not going to be able to please everyone. But if they provide a piece of feedback and it kind of sets off an alarm in your head or a little flashbulb moment and you realize, wow, that actually makes sense. What they're saying is logical and you would have arrived to the same conclusion had you had more time with a project, for example, then take it and run with it. For example, you might not realize that you included some passion projects of yours that meant a lot to you over the time that you were in school or early on in your career, but they might seem very disjointed or out of place to someone who's not familiar with them, and they might be trying to figure out, why is this totally unrelated project in this otherwise really tight furniture designer portfolio? So little things like that, even though they might be really impactful to you, might not have a place in the portfolio that you're designing for the goal that you're intending it for. Yeah, all I would say is don't burn yourself out trying to get to the perfect portfolio. Don't rework it over and over again, thinking that, oh, a different layout or a different perfect typeface is what's going to be amazing. So many of these decisions are arbitrary. So as long as you're adhering to good design principles and you're doing your best, just have fun with it and send it out for the world to see. So I hope that this feedback has been useful. Maybe some of it resonated with you. I'd be really curious to see if anyone else has tips for other people putting together their portfolio so they would like to share. And this could be anything, including portfolios that are for professionals in their mid-career, which is very difficult to do given how much red tape there is in showing your work when you're working on proprietary material. Let me know in the comments what tips you might have regarding creating beautiful portfolios that really help you land a good job or internship or switch career tracks, and things that you found that work well and things that maybe hindered you in the past. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you will stick around and watch more of my videos. I plan on posting once a week. Bye now.